This is like Scrooge and the Ghost of Christmas Future, right? The Ghost of Christmas Future tells Scrooge what's going to happen, shows him the future, and then Scrooge is like, "Forget that! I'm changing my life." And so those prophecies, those predictions, don't come true. Well, are we going to say that the Ghost of Christmas Future was a bad prophet then? Right? No, he was saying, look, if you stay on this course of action, this way of living, Scrooge, then that's what's going to happen. This is what would happen if you continue to live that way.
Do you have some biblical passages that we could pull from real quick just to kind of show your point? You can exegete real quick, and then we'll deal with some basic objections to Molinism.
Yeah. So I guess I started, my first chapter was about how to do hermeneutics, how to interpret Scripture. Second chapter is all about Scripture, and I didn't even take a position in that chapter. I just said, look, this is why many people think that determinism is true across the board. And then I said, this is why, here's some passages, a whole bunch of passages that have led people to think throughout the centuries that we actually have some, what we call now, libertarian freedom. But verses that support middle knowledge. Well, let's start here. In 1 Samuel 23, 6 through 14, summarize that. I won't read the whole passage to you, but God lets David know a truth to a counterfactual position. So this means that God has counterfactual knowledge. So namely, that if David were to stay at Keilah, then Saul would pursue him. And that if Saul were to pursue him, then the men of Keilah would give him over to Saul. All right? But David gets the heck out of Dodge, so that never happened. So that's counterfactual knowledge that God gives David. Jeremiah 38, 17 and 18 provides support for God's counterfactual knowledge. This passage makes it clear that God knows what would happen. Remember, middle knowledge brings the would. So God knows what would happen no matter what course of action Zedekiah would choose to take. Additionally, consider the test of a true prophet. That is the fulfillment of his predictions. We see that in Deuteronomy 18:22. So the test of a true prophet is the fulfillment of his predictions. But think about this. Many predictions given by biblical prophets are never fulfilled because the people who these prophecies were delivered to, they responded by changing their lives. Right? We see this. This is like Scrooge and the Ghost of Christmas Future, right? The Ghost of Christmas Future tells Scrooge what's going to happen, shows him the future, and then Scrooge is like, "Forget that! I'm changing my life." And so those prophecies, those predictions, don't come true. Well, are we going to say that the Ghost of Christmas Future was a bad prophet then? Right? No, he was saying, look, if you stay on this course of action, this way of living, Scrooge, then that's what's going to happen. This is what would happen if you continue to live that way. But we see passages like this in Scripture. In Isaiah 38, 1 through 5, Amos 7, 1 through 6, Jonah 3, 1 through 10. I encourage people to go read them. Right? So it follows then that the people who chose to change their lives avoided the consequences of what would have happened if they had not changed direction, if they had not changed their lives like Scrooge did. Okay, so this is more counterfactual knowledge that God has, or that he has provided prophets. So on top of that, because prophets don't just get their knowledge apart, or God, I should say prophets get their knowledge from God, right? So the source of the prophet's knowledge has to have this counterfactual knowledge. On top of that, Jesus makes many statements that suggest that he has counterfactual knowledge. You can start with John 15, 22, 24. Basically, that says, Jesus said, if I had not come and spoken to them, they would not have sinned. And then he says, if I had not done among them the works that no one else did, they would not have sinned. All right, so that seems to be counterfactual. In John 18:36, Jesus offered the following counterfactual knowledge claim. He says, if my kingdom were of this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. And in Matthew 26, verse 24, Jesus says, "Woe to that one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that one not to have been born." So I could go on. There are many passages in Scripture that seem to affirm that God has counterfactual knowledge. But the question is, okay, counterfactual knowledge is great, but does God have middle knowledge? So the question hinges upon when God logically possesses counterfactual knowledge, right? So does God have this counterfactual knowledge before or logically prior to his creative decree and his creative act, or does God create the world and then gain knowledge of it, right? So is God ignorant of what would happen, then creates and then learns, right? Do we have a learning God, or is God a maximally great being who's always omniscient? So if God owns this counterfactual knowledge from eternity past, and thus causally before his creative decree to choose to actualize this specific actual world, then God, by definition, has middle knowledge. So that is to say, if God is eternally omniscient, right? That is to say, if God is omniscient without beginning, then God must possess middle knowledge. Now, this gets philosophical because the Bible never says God possesseth middle knowledge, right? But guess what? The Trinity is philosophical. I mean,
so true.
Right? Coming to the conclusion that God is a Trinity is based on philosophy because the Bible never says that God's a Trinity either. Right? The Bible never says that God possesseth middle knowledge, and the Bible never says that God is a Trinity. Be that as it may, the Bible, you can logically infer both from the Bible, that God is a Trinity and that God possesses middle knowledge. So, yeah, in a nutshell, we do have biblical reason, to think that humans possess libertarian freedom. I didn't share those passages, but I point people to my book. And we have biblical reason to think that God possesses counterfactual knowledge. And so it's just one more step. Does God learn, right? Or is God always omniscient, as it were? Is God eternally omniscient? If God is a maximally great being who is always omniscient, then that includes logically prior to creation, then God possesses middle knowledge.
Absolutely, and that's actually why it's that's exactly what got me when I got into it. It's like a lot of the if-then statements in Scripture was like,
Yeah.
And Braxton put it well when he was on the channel. It's like, okay, well, he said if or then or would. Is God a liar? And you're like, well, no. Okay, then counterfactual middle
Yeah.
knowledge must be a thing. And then I like the way that is where there's a lot of, I think Acts 17, especially toward the end of Acts 17, is probably one of the best places to show that mankind has free will, where it says perhaps even feel their way toward God. In the end, he's not very far from each of us. So there's a lot of parts in the Bible that show libertarian freedom as well. And of course, we know that God separated the end from the beginning as well. So here we are. Molinism seems to fit very well with the biblical data. And I think if people really want to know this better, really well, you should pick up Dr. Stratton's book. So some of the things that I've heard people object to, we don't have to spend a lot of time here, but I think it would be